If the movies that are on my IMDb watch list continue in this way, I'm going to need some support, guys. Leaving Las Vegas was directed by Mike Figgis. Pretty sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. And stars Nicolas Cage and Elizabeth Shue. No, not Shue, S-H-O-E, although that would be pretty cool. Shue, S-H-U-E, I think. Yep, S-H-U-E. Also, her name is spelled with an S instead of a Z. Just a very interesting name all around. Anyway, Leaving Las Vegas follows the story of a man who has pretty much lost everything. He's lost his job, he's lost his family, that included a little boy, and now he's going to go to Las Vegas to quite literally drink himself to death. That is actually his goal. That's what he has declared. He's going to go to Las Vegas to drink his life away. He has nothing left to lose, everything is lost to him, and now all he has to do now is die. It's a very unfortunate premise, but there it is. Along the way of his many drunken escapades, he runs into a escort. I was trying to think of a nice way to put it, but yeah, how about we just work with escort for now? The escort's name is Sarah, and as she points out, it is spelled S-E-R-A. Not with an H, and not S-A-R-A. It is S-E-R-A. They're both pretty down on their luck people. They both need each other. And when I say need, I mean in the same way that you might need food or need water. It is something that is essential to you. It is not necessarily a loving relationship, at least not at first. It's almost parasitical. You discover along the way that they both have similar situations. One has lost everything and just needs some companionship, and one has the facade of having what she needs, money, but she needs companionship just as much as he does. And so, as I like to say in one of my favorite ways of summarizing a plot, shenanigans ensue. Roger Ebert called this one of the great movies. He gave this 4 stars out of 4. Short review, I don't agree with him, but one interesting thing that he did point out was that he believed that Nicolas Cage was one of the great actors that was working today. Again, don't necessarily agree with him, but I will say that Nicolas Cage definitely has some acting ability. There's no doubt about that. He won an Oscar for this role, so you really can't deny that he at least has some talent. The man is certainly not afraid to be a bit eccentric. When I was watching Leaving Las Vegas, I saw one scene that was included in this clip on YouTube called Nicolas Cage Loses His Stuff, and I was like, okay, there's another example of him freaking out. And apparently that happens a lot in Mandy as well. I haven't seen Mandy, but I have seen enough Nicolas Cage movies to understand that the man is certainly willing to put his reputation on the line for the sake of a character. Which makes me even more excited to see that one movie about a vampire in which he runs down the street screaming, "I'm a vampire." Vampire's Kiss, that's what it's called. And that's going to be a fun one to watch. This movie was depressing as all get out. Those of you that have seen Requiem for a Dream probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And also, a very underrated movie, Shame, starring the one and only Michael Fassbender, deals with a very particular type of addiction that no one really talks about in 2019. Regardless, anytime you're dealing with a movie about any kind of vice, whether that be drugs, alcohol, or sex, you as a viewer are going to be in for a rough time. Nicolas Cage brings a very real and fully formed sense of depression to his character, and tragedy and desperation. It's not the kind that you would normally expect from a person, because it's just desperation to see it out, to see his life out. It's not desperation to gain anything. He feels like he's lost everything. He doesn't need to gain anything more. He just feels like his life can now come to a close because he has nothing left to live for. Actually, that probably translates into one of my minor gripes about the film, is that we don't explore much of his backstory. There's a scene of him burning a picture of him with his wife and his son, which we never hear anything about. And perhaps if they had just briefly touched on that a little bit more, we would have been able to better empathize with this character. On the other hand, perhaps the movie wasn't even about that part. I think, in retrospect, it might have been a good idea to simply focus on the relationship that he has with Sarah. I'm not sure if this was a directing decision or if this was Nicolas Cage's decision, but his interpretation of what it's like to be depressed and to be desperate was interesting, because the general impression that we get of depression and sadness from other movies and from society in general is that you're very lethargic, you're very passive, you stay in bed all day, you can't seem to get out of bed, etc. But many people react differently to depression, and I think that the way that it's displayed in this movie is that sometimes you have this very hands-off devil may care, whatever happens, happens approach to life. It's kind of scary because you're not really sure, in that case, who is in real need, because they might cover it up with being very cheerful. But the only reason why they're cheerful is because they don't care anymore. Nicolas Cage certainly stole the show in this movie, but not enough can be said about Elizabeth Shue. I haven't seen her in too many other things, although I did a little bit of digging and found out that she was actually in Back to the Future, parts 2 and 3. So that was an interesting little nugget of information to discover. She's someone who needs companionship just as much as Ben. She is desperate for love and affection in a world surrounded by men who simply use her. And the movie definitely gets into graphic detail about exactly how they use her. Yeah, definitely not a movie you want to see with your grandparents. The chemistry that Nicolas Cage and Elizabeth Shue have is palpable, and it's really fun to watch, even when there are some really, really difficult scenes to get through between the two of them. It's just very clear that from the get-go, from the moment they met, they had that bond that can't really be described between actors, but it's definitely there, and it is the driving heart. It is the soul of the movie. And speaking of soul, the soundtrack for this film was quite amazing. It played a much bigger part in the movie than I thought. It's very jazzy. It's very melodious. There are some lyrics in there as well. But the underlying genre that is part of this movie is jazzy. The music is almost a character unto itself. Jazz is, by its own nature, improvisatory and kind of seductive, especially if it's like a combo or maybe a solo singer. And those characteristics of the music went right along with the film. Ben goes through life almost kind of like an improviser. He is impulsive. He decides to do this. He decides to do that. And he's in Las Vegas, for crying out loud. So he's just kind of overstimulated with lights and life and everything going on around him, and he just kind of makes it up as he goes along, which is a lot like jazz. And Sarah's job as an escort is to seduce men, which is another parallel between jazz. There's also a pretty cool scene where Sarah goes to a bar and she tries to seduce a man, and oh my gosh, is that Arlie Ermy? Arlie Ermy! Arlie Ermy is in this movie! That was one of the coolest cameos ever. My jaw just went like when I saw Arlie Ermy in this film. He turns her down pretty hard. She should have known that he was a drill instructor. You don't mess with drill instructors. You just don't. If only Gomer Pyle had been there to show her the error of her ways. So one little quirk about my viewing style, I suppose, is that if I'm watching a movie, especially if it's a new movie, actually I would say only if it's a movie that I have never seen before, I like to put subtitles on, because sometimes characters have a tendency to slur words or maybe just not pronounce as clearly as they can. But even beyond that, I like putting subtitles on because it allows me to follow. I'm a very visual person, so if I can see what they're saying, then it allows me to follow the plot much easier if I was just hearing it. But the question I have to ask is, why do subtitles suck? Why do people who write subtitles leave out all these things? They leave out all these details, like characters saying yes, characters saying hello, characters saying their name. Please, someone explain this to me if I'm missing something, because I just don't understand why you wouldn't include those things in the movie. If I were hard of hearing, or if I had a audio disability, I would find it extremely frustrating to not have certain parts of the movie included in the subtitles. It just doesn't make any sense. Maybe it's the purist in me. Like, for instance, I really hate it when I see an abridged book. I hate that stuff. Like, when I was a kid, I got The Count of Monte Cristo for Christmas, and it was like a 600-page book, and I got through like half of it. I looked in the back and it said abridged, and I actually got angry. I was only maybe like 12 or 13, but I remember just like barging into my dad's room and being like, "This is abridged! This is abridged!" So I don't know, I guess it's just in my nature when I read subtitles for me to want them to include everything. Is it too much to ask? Anyway, the characters in this film are treated terribly by anybody that they come across that doesn't know them. This is perhaps a lesson that I only personally take away from the film, but it just goes to show you that just because someone has the appearance of being morally bankrupt, if they're an escort or an alcoholic, doesn't mean you have the right to treat them like trash. And everybody's just like us. It's just that some people might have taken worse decisions along the way. The ending is very reminiscent of Romeo and Juliet. I'm just going to leave it at that. This is a very heavy, very sad movie. I would recommend watching it by yourself so that you can fully absorb what's going on. And like I said, don't watch it with your grandmother. And I'm going to give this one an 8.5 out of 10. So what's the best movie about addiction that you've ever seen? Any kind of vice, any kind of addiction that is portrayed in film, what's the best one that you've seen? Let me know in the comments below. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next cinematic adventure.